It was 12:23 in the morning when the woman in cabin 7 knocked on my door and asked if I'd walk down to the water with her. By the time we reached the end of the dock, she had set down her camera bag, slipped off her sandals, and told me she hadn't packed anything to swim in. That wasn't an oversight. The way she said it, with a smile that arrived 1 full second after the words, made sure I understood that. My name is Rhett Colburn. I was 29 that August, working structural steel for a commercial construction company out of Green Bay, the kind of job where you spend 9 months a year 50 feet off the ground and the remaining 3 trying to convince your body that ground level is still safe. I hadn't taken a real vacation in 3 years, not for any noble reason. I just hadn't had anyone to go with and hadn't figured out how to go alone. The lake cabin I rented was in the Northwoods of Wisconsin, 40 minutes from the nearest town with a grocery store, on a private road shared by 8 cabins and a small marina. I'd found it through a rental site after my coworker told me his family had spent summers there when he was a kid. The listing said rustic charm. In practice, that meant a propane stove, a porch screen with a hole in it, and a dock that creaked in a way that made you watch where you stepped. I loved it immediately. The woman in cabin 7 had arrived 2 days after I did. Her name was Nola Voss. She was 27, a freelance nature and wildlife photographer whose work had appeared in the kind of magazines that showed up in dentist waiting rooms and also on the coffee tables of people who actually paid attention to the world. She had driven up from Chicago with a Subaru loaded to the headliner with camera bags, a tripod that collapsed down to her waist, and 4 cases of energy drinks she said were not a dependency but a lifestyle. She was there for the Perseid meteor shower and for the reflections on the lake at night, the kind of shots that required patience, darkness, and the ability to sit still for 45 minutes waiting for a cloud to move. I was there for the opposite of all that. I wanted to sleep past 6, fish badly, and think about nothing with great intention. We had spoken 4 times before that night. She borrowed Firestarter from me on day 2. I helped carry her equipment bag to the dock on day 3 when she was struggling with too many things at once and too much pride to ask directly. On the 4th evening, we both happened to make coffee at the same time and ended up sitting on our respective porch steps with our mugs, talking across the gap between cabins until the moths found the porch lights and reminded us it was late. She asked what I built for a living. I told her. She asked if I ever got used to the height. I told her no, but I'd made peace with the fear a long time ago. She looked at me like that was an interesting answer. I noticed things about Nola the way you notice things when you're trying not to. The way she moved through a space like she was always aware of the light. How she got genuinely delighted by small things. A heron standing in the shallows, the way smoke from the fire pit curled sideways when the wind shifted. She didn't perform enthusiasm. It was just there, already happening, and you either caught it or you didn't. She had come here alone. I'd registered that early. The Subaru held 1 sleeping bag, 1 camp chair, 1 person's supplies. I didn't ask about it. I had my own version of the same story, and I knew enough to recognize when someone had made a quiet peace with their particular version of alone. For me, it had been a woman named Amy, 2.5 years, and a clean ending that still left marks. She had wanted me to transfer to a company in Columbus, make more money, wear the kind of clothes that needed dry cleaning. None of that was wrong, it just wasn't me. We spent the last 6 months auditioning to be the versions of ourselves the other person needed. By the time we stopped, we were both relieved and exhausted. I'd spent the 18 months since reminding myself that relief was not the same as indifference. So when Nola knocked on my door at 12:23, I was lying on top of my sleeping bag with a box fan pointed at the ceiling, too warm to seize and not tired enough to do anything about it. She held up her camera like it explained everything. There's a gap in the clouds coming. I need someone to hold a reflector panel. It takes 2 people. I looked at her. She was wearing a light cotton shirt with the sleeves pushed up, shorts, sandals. Her hair was loose in a way that meant she'd already been awake for a while. A reflector panel, I said. It bounces ambient light. At midnight. The moon's almost full. It's the best time. I had no objection that would survive actual scrutiny. I grabbed my shoes. The gravel path to the dock ran between 2 rows of pine trees, and smelled like every good summer I had ever had. The lake was still. The moon sat above the tree line, already laying a long silver stripe across the water. Nola moved quickly, setting up her tripod at the end of the dock, while I held the reflector panel and tried to make myself useful. "Point it about 15 degrees left," she said, without looking up from the viewfinder. "This left or your left?" "They're the same left. We're facing the same direction." "I'm facing your back." She glanced over her shoulder. "You've been working steel for how many years?" "7. And you still can't sort out left from right?" "I know them fine on a beam. Reflectors are new territory." One corner of her mouth moved. She turned back to the camera. I held the panel where I'd been told and listened to the quiet. No traffic, no voices, just the occasional shift of water against the dock pilings and the sound of her clicking through a sequence of shots. After a while, she said, "You can put it down. I got what I needed." I set the panel against a post. She was reviewing images on the camera screen, and I looked out at the water instead of hovering. The lake at night looked like something someone had invented to make people question their priorities. I understood why she'd driven 4 hours for it. "These are good," she said quietly. She turned the screen toward me. The shot was the moon's reflection on the water, elongated and trembling at the edges, the dock visible as a dark horizontal line in the lower frame. "The clouds you lose, the stillness you keep." I asked about the work. Not politely. Actually, she talked about it the way people talk about things that cost them something. A winter she'd spent in Patagonia chasing condors, 11 hours in a Wisconsin marsh in chest waders, waiting for a particular egret to land at a particular angle, the photo from that day that paid 3 months of rent and ran in a magazine on 6 continents. "Was it worth 11 hours in the marsh?" I asked. "Yes, no pause, but that's easy to say now." We sat at the end of the dock with our feet above the water. Neither of us suggested leaving. Then Nola stood, walked to the edge, and looked out at the lake for a long moment. "I didn't bring a swimsuit," she said. I waited. I knew I was coming down here. She turned toward me with an expression that was trying to be casual and wasn't quite landing. "I just didn't pack one." "That was a choice," I said carefully. "It was." I looked from the water to her and back. "I'm not going to pretend I don't understand what you're saying." "Good." She reached back and set her camera gently behind her, away from the edge. "Because I've been trying to say it for 3 days without being obvious, and I'm getting tired of the project." That made me laugh. The involuntary kind that doesn't wait for permission. She smiled, and it reached her eyes, and I felt it in a place I'd been keeping closed. "I'll turn around," I said. "You don't have to. I want to be the kind of person who turns around." She studied me for a second. "That might be the most specific thing anyone has ever said to me." I faced the tree line. I heard the quiet sound of fabric. The dock shifted slightly, then a clean splash, and the sound of her surfacing. "Your turn," she said. I turned. She was in the water up to her shoulders, hair already wet and dark around her, one arm resting along the ladder. She was watching me the way she watched the lake, like she already knew something good was about to happen and was just waiting for it to arrive. I left my shirt and shorts on the dock and jumped in before I could make it complicated. The cold hit like a door slamming shut, a real shock, the kind that pulls the breath clean out of you. I surfaced gasping and Nola laughed from a few feet away. "That's northern Wisconsin in August," she said. 70 degrees on the surface, 50 below. "You could have warned me." "I thought you were brave." "I'm brave 40 feet off the ground. Water is a different category." She floated on her back, looking up at the sky. I swam a few feet out and back, letting my body adjust. When I came closer to the ladder, she had righted herself and was watching me again with that same even attention. "Can I ask you something?" she said. "You're going to whether I say yes or not." "Fair." She pushed wet hair from her face. "Why do you do that?" "What?" "Act like you're not interested, when you clearly are." The dock creaked overhead. A frog started somewhere in the reeds near the shore. "I'm being respectful," I said. "You're hiding." She said it gently. "An observation, not a verdict. I've watched you make excuses to end conversations for 4 days. Every time things start going somewhere, you say you should get back, or you remember something you meant to do. Maybe I actually had things to do. Your definition of vacation involves a remarkable amount of not relaxing. I held the ladder and looked at her. The moonlight was doing something particular to the water, and I had completely run out of plausible reasons. I'm not good at the beginning of things, I said. I'm better once there are rules. What kind of rules? Any kind, something that tells me what this is. She was quiet for a moment, then, what if neither of us knows yet, and that's okay? Something I'd been carrying around for 18 months made a small tentative move toward the exit. Who told you this was a good idea? I said. I told myself, I do that when nobody else is available. I moved closer until we were a foot apart, both holding the ladder, the wooden rungs slick under our palms. Her eyes were very dark in the moonlight, and she wasn't pretending anything. I ended a long relationship before I came up here, I said. I know, you mentioned it on the porch. Not the details, but enough. I didn't realize I'd mentioned it. You said you came alone because you hadn't figured out how yet. People don't say that when everything's fine. She paid attention the way I paid attention to structural loads, carefully, methodically, like the information actually mattered. It ended the right way, I said. We just weren't right together. But I've been slow since then. Slow is fine. Her hand left the ladder and came to rest against my arm, just above the elbow. Light, a question. I'm not asking for anything you don't want to give. I know that. So, what do you want? The honest answer arrived before I could reason it away. I want to stop making you work this hard for a conversation I've been wanting to have since day 2. She smiled, slowly with her whole face. Day 2, she said, when you helped with the equipment bag. You were struggling. I was struggling on purpose. I laughed again. She kissed me before the laugh was fully over, her hands rising to my face in the cold water, and I kissed her back without thinking about it, which was exactly what it needed to be. Not careful, not considered. Just real and a little overdue and genuinely worth the wait. When we pulled apart, we were both out of breath, for reasons that had nothing to do with swimming. We floated beside the dock for a while after that. The conversation changed, lighter, easier, like something had been set down. She told me about chasing thunderheads across 3 states for a single shot. I told her about a bridge project in Detroit that had gone wrong in 4 consecutive ways and how we'd fixed it. She made me explain what a structural tolerance failure actually looked like. I was halfway through the explanation when I realized I couldn't remember the last time someone had asked a follow-up question about my work. Eventually, she shivered. I noticed before she said anything. We should get out, I said. You first. I'll face the other direction. You watched me get in. I was conducting a professional assessment. Of what, exactly? Bravery. I climbed the ladder, wrapped my shirt around my waist, and faced the tree line. A few minutes later, she was beside me at the dock's edge, her camera back in her lap, her shoulder against mine. The night was warm enough that we didn't need towels for long. I have to tell you something, she said. Every muscle in me went still. I'm leaving in the morning. She kept her eyes on the water. She'd gotten a call that afternoon, a magazine she'd been trying to work with for 2 years. A wildlife assignment in the Boundary Waters, starting in 5 days. The photographer they'd originally booked had pulled out. They wanted her. It's in the same direction as home and then north, she said. Not far as the map goes, but it means I'm packing up at 7. That's a real opportunity, I said. Yes. You should take it. She looked at me. Something careful moved through her expression. That was fast. Because it's true. Or because it's the easiest thing to say. I didn't answer right away. Both, I admitted. She nodded like she'd expected exactly that. I wasn't trying to make this complicated. I just thought you should know before it looked like I was disappearing. I appreciate that. You're doing it again. Doing what? Being very reasonable in a way that means you've already decided to pull back. I turned toward her. Here's the actual truth. I don't want you to leave. I'm aware I have no standing for that because we've known each other 6 days and kissed twice. But it's the real thing. She watched me with an expression I couldn't fully read. And, she said, and I don't know what to do with it. That's also the real thing. The lake was still. Somewhere far out, a loon called once and went silent. I had a boyfriend follow me to a city once, Nola said, because I got an assignment there and he wanted to try it. He stayed 8 months. By month 4, he was miserable and blaming me for it in ways he didn't even recognize. She looked at her hands. I'm not afraid of distance. I'm afraid of being the reason someone gives up something they shouldn't. I haven't asked you to give up anything. Not yet. The words sat between us. I understood what she meant. I reached over and rested my hand on hers on the dock. She didn't pull it back. What if we just had breakfast? I said. She looked at me. What? Tomorrow morning, before you pack. You're not leaving at 5, are you? I was going to start loading the car at 7. I'll knock at 7:15, we eat. And we don't have to know what this is yet. Some of the tension left her shoulders. That sounds very low stakes. That's on purpose. She turned her hand over beneath mine, her fingers closed around my palm. Okay, she said, breakfast. I slept 4 hours. At 7:15, I knocked on cabin 7's door holding 2 cups of coffee from the pot I'd made on my propane stove because she had mentioned that mornings without coffee were not mornings she participated in. She opened the door in a flannel shirt and bare feet and looked at the cups. Is that Colombian roast from my cooler? You left it on the porch last night. I put it back after. She accepted the cup. That's a very specific variety to remember. You mentioned it on day 2. You said the lodge coffee tasted like something they trained a machine to regret. She stared at me. I say things like that constantly, and nobody retains them. I retain things. She stepped back and let me in. We ate scrambled eggs at her small table. She had a cast iron pan and apparently brought her own olive oil on vacation, which she explained by saying she was not leaving good fat behind for the sake of packing light. I said that was an extremely specific philosophy. She said it had never once let her down. Her equipment was already mostly packed. The cabin had the particular look of somewhere mid-goodbye. I noticed but didn't comment. After breakfast, she showed me photos on her laptop. Not the moon reflection from the night before, those she was still editing. The egret series from the marsh. A fox kit looking directly into the lens from 18 inches away, its expression somewhere between curious and judgmental. The thunderhead sequence across the plains, which she said she'd chased through 3 states over 2 days. You waited on these, I said, pointing to the storm series. How long? 6 hours in a parking lot outside of Salina, Kansas. She paused. My dad called during the 2nd hour. When I told him what I was doing, he said I sounded like someone who needed a real job. What do you sound like to yourself? She thought about it. Like someone doing exactly the right thing in exactly the wrong place to explain it to other people. I understood that more than I wanted to admit. We carried her equipment to the Subaru in 3 trips. On the last one, I held the hatch while she arranged things in the cargo area with precision that could only come from practice. Can I ask you something? I said. She closed the hatch. You're going to whether I say yes or not. Borrowed line. I know. Ask. Do you actually want to go? She didn't answer immediately. She leaned against the back of the car and looked toward the lake, visible through a gap in the pines. Yes, she said, and no, both at the same time, which is the worst version of wanting something. Yeah. I love the work. She said it like she was reminding herself of something important. Not because it's exciting or because people imagine photographers must have interesting lives. Because when I'm in the field and something happens, something moves, or the light shifts, or an animal does something it shouldn't, I feel like I'm paying attention to the world the way it deserves. I don't feel that way anywhere else. Then you shouldn't give it up, I said. She looked at me. I know. I mean it. Not as the polite thing. I mean it because I watched you talk about a photo of a specific egret for 20 minutes at midnight, and you were the most alive I've seen someone look in a long time. Something crossed her face. Don't do that, she said quietly. Do what? Make it so easy to like you right before I leave. I reached over and tucked a strand of hair back from her cheek. She held very still. Here's what I think, I said. You should go, and I should give you my number, and I should mean it when I give it to you. All three of those things can be true at the same time. She looked up. And you mean it? I don't do things I don't mean. Occupational hazard, bad welds cost lives. She held still for another second. Then she took my phone from my jacket pocket without asking, which I liked, and put her number in it. I'm a bad texter when I'm in the field, she said. I work on construction sites. I go dark for 8 hours at a stretch. I go dark for weeks. Then we'll both be patient. She handed the phone back. Her fingers stayed a second longer than necessary. Then she got in the car. I stepped back. She rolled down the window. Rhett. Yeah. Don't wait so long next time. I watched her taillights disappear around the bend at the end of the private road. Then I went back to my cabin and sat on the porch and drank the rest of the coffee that had gone cold. She texted on the third night, a photo of the boundary waters at dusk, flat water, birch trees, a sky going violet at the edges, and the message, worth the drive. I wrote back, how are the mornings? She replied cold, no decent coffee, surviving. That was how it started. Long distance between a wildlife photographer and a structural welder is not a romance movie. It is missed calls, and learning to stay present over video when she's describing something she saw, and I can't see it, and eating dinner over FaceTime while one of us fights bad cell signal in a remote location. It is her calling from an empty parking lot somewhere in Montana at 11 at night because that was the first quiet moment she'd had in 4 days. It is me texting from an atrium I'm rigging at 6 in the morning because that was the only 10 minutes I had. But there were good parts too. When she came back through Wisconsin in October, on her way home from the Boundary Waters, she rerouted herself by 2 hours without making a thing of it, showing up at my apartment on a Thursday evening with a bag over her shoulder and the same way of scanning a room that she had of scanning a shoreline. I opened the door and she said, "Your apartment needs better light." Hello to you too. I mean it professionally. You say that every time you criticize something. It's still accurate every time. I let her in. She stayed 4 days. We ate at a Polish place on the east side that she declared was non-negotiable as a regular destination. We drove out to the lakefront one evening and stood in the wind coming off Lake Michigan until it was too cold to stay. On her last night, she sat on my couch and went through new work on her laptop, pointing out things I never would have caught on my own. The way a specific bird's posture indicated something about the wind direction, how she'd tracked a particular wolf pack for 3 days before getting the shot she wanted. You're genuinely good, I said. I know, she said it without vanity, just fact. It took me a long time to let myself say that. What changed? I stopped waiting for other people to say it first. She closed the laptop. It's better that way. You stop making your own certainty someone else's job. I thought about that for a long time after she left. Then I thought about it for longer. At 5 months, I told my foreman I was looking into a transfer. The company had a commercial office in Minneapolis, 3 hours from Green Bay, 2.5 from Chicago. Closer to the flight paths Nola used on her way in and out of the country. Not the same city as her, but a different geometry of the distance. He asked if this was about a woman. I said it was about a lot of things. He nodded and said he'd call the regional manager. I called Nola that night. She was somewhere outside. I could hear wind in the Adirondacks on a long exposure night shoot. I'm thinking about Minneapolis, I said. A pause. Why? Because staying in Green Bay, just to prove I'm not moving for someone, seems like a specific kind of stubbornness I don't actually respect in myself. Another pause. Then, that is the most Rhett sentence I have ever heard. Good. Means I mean it. You don't have to do this. I know. That's the part I like about it. She laughed, the surprise kind, the kind where you can hear the smile underneath it. I'm not in Minneapolis. I know. You're also not always in the Adirondacks. You move. My base is Chicago. Minneapolis is 3 hours from Chicago. A longer quiet this time. The kind that means something is being carefully turned over. You'd actually do this, she said. Not a question. I'm already doing it. I heard the wind on her end shift then, Rhett. Yeah. Don't transfer for me. Transfer because it's a good decision that happens to be compatible with what I want. Those aren't the same thing, and they don't feel the same 5 years from now. I'm aware. That's what I said. I know what you said. A pause. I'm glad you said it. I transferred to Minneapolis in January. Nola kept her base in Chicago. The 3 hours between us was the most manageable distance I'd had in a long time, and we figured out a rhythm the same way you figure out any system. One iteration at a time, adjusting as you go. In the spring, we drove back up to the Northwoods. Different cabin, hours were taken, but the same dock. We got there in the evening. The water was still technically too cold to swim, but Nola set up her tripod at the end of the dock anyway and spent 2 hours taking long exposure shots of the stars coming out above the lake. I sat beside her equipment and watched her work. At some point, she stopped and looked at me. You're not bored? No. Most people are bored watching me shoot. Most people probably aren't paying attention to the right thing. She tilted her head. The lake sat perfectly still behind her, catching the first stars. What's the right thing? I looked at her. The way she looked at a frame she already knew was going to be exactly what she wanted. You, I said. She turned back to the camera, but she was smiling when she did, and she let the shutter run long after that, and the dock was quiet, and the water held every available light, and I stayed exactly where I was and paid attention to all of it. What would you have done if someone walked you down to the water at midnight and only then told you they hadn't brought anything to swim in? Have you ever had a moment that turned in a direction you didn't see coming? Tell me your story in the comments. And if you'd like to be a little closer to what we do here, we've opened memberships, shorter exclusive stories every week, no ads, just the story from start to finish. The link is below. Leave a like if this one stayed with you, subscribe so you catch the next one, and I'll see you then.